Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave. We'd love to know where you think we got it right and where you think we got it wrong, which you can do by visiting unsilentpodcast.com. You can visit us on Rumble, get a great comment section there, or several of the different social media channels. So we'd love to hear what you think about our commentary and where we got it right and wrong. So that said, I have a graph to share with you this week, Brian, that I think is indicative of our times. So let's go here and click the right button and go to that window and take a look. All right. Yearly mentions of prejudice in popular U.S. news media outlets. Now, this guy does a whole bunch of different analysis of different media types and literally millions of different articles. But do you notice a trend here at all as time goes on?
So for those who are listening on audio only, we're looking at some charts that show it's referencing media outlets like New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, Wall Street Journal, and he's charting the number of times certain words and phrases have been used. So example, in one chart, he's got racism or racist or racists. Another one, he's got sexism or sexist or misogyny. Homophobia and homophobic is a different chart. Transphobia and transphobic is a different chart. Islamophobic is a different chart. And anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic is a different chart. And in each one, it's just a line graph showing the frequency of the for each chart. So, for example, I'll start with the first one: racism, racist, racists. How often those news outlets, New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, Wall Street Journal, use those words. I think it's monthly is what he's talking about here, but I could be wrong about that. And it starts in 1970 through 1980 through 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020. And it's pretty flat from there's a little decrease in 1970, probably coming off the civil rights stuff in 68. Pretty flat from about 74, it looks like, to about 2011. And then it goes, what they say in the stock market, they call it parabolic, where it just basically goes vertical.
So clearly from these graphs we're looking at here, from all of them, what's happened over the last 50 years is we have become exponentially more prejudiced as a society. That's one conclusion one could make from these graphs.
I wouldn't even say the last 50 years. I would say the last 14, looking at these charts. It's pretty...
Well, yes.
Sure. There's little spikes and there's little mountains and little molehills here and there. But for the most part, they're all certainly flat until from like 70 to 88, 86, somewhere in there. A little bump in the early 90s.
Right.
And then back to flat again, 2000 to 2008-ish. And then it just takes off. So I'd say the last 15 years, we've become a supremely racist, phobophobia society.
Yeah. And now, does that match your experience, Brian?
Experience as I take in stuff on TV, or experience in real life?
No, experience in the real world where you interact with various people. I assume every now and then you meet somebody of a different race. You might meet a Jew here or there.
Yeah, I got neighbors like anyone. I got people I bump into in all kinds of walks of life.
Maybe some same-sex folks periodically, or some Islamic people. You may bump into them every now and then. Yeah. So obviously this is very tongue in cheek, but if one were to take reality and say that this graph is a reflection of the actual reality, I'm going to leave it up while we talk about this for a little bit. If one were to take this and say this is an actual reflection of reality in America, then one would conclude that we've become insanely more bigoted and prejudiced in the last 14 years, certainly in the last 14, 15 years, and, since the 1970s, which I think any honest person who has any concern at all for the facts and for people's average everyday experience would say is untrue and is a slander. In my opinion, I've got a very negative reaction to this because this is a slander, and it is a ridiculous assertion about the state of people getting along with each other in the real world. Now, I will acknowledge that this is a media creation. This is a political, what do you want to call it? The media political industrial complex. This is a creation of that sort of propaganda arm of philosophy that says that the basic values of America are wrong and the basic people of America are horrible people. That's what
Yeah.
this is a reflection of.
Yeah, again, you asked what my experience is like. When I was a sophomore in high school, so this would have been in around 1990, 91, somewhere in there. Um, my mom met a couple who just moved to Washington State from Texas. They were old. Like the husband was elderly, I would say. He was probably, you know, I'm gonna guess he's probably 65, 70, maybe even. The wife was probably 15 years younger, and they had adopted two black sons.
Mhm.
And they met my mom and they asked her at the school I went to, which was a very small rural town called Enumclaw up in your neck of the woods up there, Dave.
Yep.
And they were asking about places to go. And my mom was telling them about how much I enjoyed going to school there. They moved from Texas. They're like looking for a place to you know, grow roots in their family.
Yeah.
And they literally asked her if the schools were integrated. Now, the older of the two sons that they had became like my best friend my sophomore year, and we
Yeah.
were like Mutt and Jeff. He was like 6 feet tall and dark complected, and I was 5'4" and
Right.
chubby and not dark complected. He was great at basketball. I was horrible. I played football. He whatever. We became very very good friends, and I was just distraught when they moved away. They only lived out there. They moved to another state. I don't remember if they went back to Texas or I can't remember where they went. It's been so many years. But point is, like, they literally asked if the schools are integrated. Now, I mean, and it sounds wild to even say that in 1990.
Yeah.
Like, what
Yeah.
kind of like what in the world would now? Like, again, the dad was like 70, so like he's
Yeah.
born in 1920. So I
Yeah.
mean,
Right.
or 1925 or whatever. Like, he was an older guy, so I guess it kind of made sense, maybe given his life experience or whatever. But no, these charts are the inverse of my experience.
Right, right, exactly, exactly. I mean, if you look at, I was in high school in the late '70s, early '80s, and if you looked at the state of race relations, et cetera, in then, I mean, I think everybody at Lakes High, I mean, pretty much everybody got along. But in terms of now, people, you just meet people and you don't even think about it. The other interesting thing mentioning that is the movies and the TV shows and everything that were popular in those days. You had people just making fun of everybody,
Oh yeah,
regardless of. I mean, you had these celebrity roasts where Don Rickles
yeah,
would make fun of Sammy Davis Jr., who was who converted to Judaism and was black, and
yeah,
he would just beat him up about that, or somebody would beat up Frank Sinatra about Italian American heritage. I mean, and everybody was just
yeah,
and nobody thought anything of it. It was just like, hey, we're all just Americans, and we're all just going to get along, and we can poke fun at each other. It's cool. You can't do that now, or else you are canceled. And we've talked about that before, so I'm not going to get too far off in that. But the thing that's interesting to me about this is this alternate reality that we're being presented that contradicts our basic reality, that
yeah,
contradicts most people's basic experience of, I mean, it is interesting to see that there's always been as much of a steady stream of anti-Semitism and racism on these charts. But even those have just skyrocketed in the
yeah.
past 15 years.
There's one group missing from these charts, though, Dave. There,
Well, but
I don't see where we're tracking Christians
see,
and
I knew you were going to mention that horrible
Ca-
oppressor group.
Caucasian like
Yeah, well, because
um,
they are the oppressors in this, because they are the ones that are doing. I mean, as part of the oppressor group, Brian. Don't you find it's so difficult to maintain anger at so many people and oppress so many people simultaneously? I mean, every day I'm called upon to oppress like 8 or 9 or 10 different groups. It's exhausting sometimes. It's just terribly exhausting.
yeah, it's it's funny. The last podcast we did, we talked about Yuri Brezmenov, who was from the KG defected from the KGB and Soviet Union, and before that we were talking a couple episodes. We were talking about the media and just how it and that's been
Yeah,
kind of a common theme for us is like the media and how it's shifted and things like that. And it's really those charts really show how the media has gone from being the presenter of truth, the
right,
facts as we understand them, as we like here's what we know, draw your own conclusions, kind of a thing.
right,
And we are here representing everyday folks and doing the work for them to expose hypocrisy and abuses of power and things like that because you don't
right.
have time to because you're going to work and raising your kids and going to ballet lessons and things like that to we are the arbiters of good and righteousness, and
Yeah,
we will tell you who shall be looked upon with favor and who should not be looked upon with favor. Those charts line up perfectly with that shift in the media's
right.
perception, my belief of what the media's perception of their role in our society is, of going from just the facts, man, we're reporting them as best we can, we're calling balls and strikes, to we will tell you which groups should be looked upon with favor and which ones should not.
It's fascinating if you if you talk about people coming out of journalism school and why did they go to journalism school? You find a lot of people. It used to be what you were just saying. This is why they went to journalism school, to hold powerful people to account, et cetera.
Yeah,
To be, they used to call journalism the fifth estate, right? It was there's the politics, there's all the power people in business, there's all that, and then there's media that's supposed to shine a light on every dark corner.
right.
But the reality is now that people coming out of journalism school, to a great extent, say the reason they went into that was basically for activist reasons.
Yeah, social justice and activism and things like that. Yeah,
Exactly right. Which is then definitionally a perversion of what media was really meant to be. It really
yeah,
has crossed the line from into more of, and we've, discussed this, so I won't beat a dead horse too much, but it's really crossed the line into more of a priesthood, somebody who, as you're saying, is going to say, here's the truth that you need to believe.
yeah,
Here's, and not only that, but here are the only facts that are acceptable for you to consider. And that supports these notions of hyper anger all the time. Because if you're angry all the time, what can you not do? You can't sit calmly and think through things and decipher what's really going on in society. If you're just mad all the time because of this injustice and that injustice and this social injustice and this group being oppressed and that group being oppressed, you'll never have time to sit down and actually think about what's going on. And who does that serve? That
yeah,
serves those that are in entrenched positions of power.
yeah. I was thinking as you were talking about, back when you were in high school, back, what'd you say, in the 40s or 50s or something like that, when you were in high school?
30,
Yeah,
1840s, 1840s.
18, but back when you and I were in high school, you're 10 or 15 years ahead of me.
Yeah.
But even when I was in school, there's exceptions to what I'm about to say. There was abuses and hazing that happened on a scale that I would not be inclined to think that was healthy. But
Yeah.
putting those extreme exceptions aside, there was this kind of banter, especially amongst the males. I was not ever in female circles, so I can't speak to that. But in the groups of young boys and men as they were maturing, there was this kind of process of everyone had their time, everyone had their turn in the barrel, so to speak, where it was your turn to get the Sammy Davis Jr. treatment,
Sure.
and there was the Don Rickles of the group, and you were the target. And
Oh
then
yeah.
other times you got to be Don Rickles, and they were the target.
Yeah.
And I never really thought much of it other than it was how we had fun. We kind of,
Sure.
as young men, we kind of had fun at each other's expenses and things like that. and there was no holds barred. I mean, there was
Right.
things we joked about that you would not joke about in front of your mom,
Right.
or certainly in front of the teacher.
Right.
But you know what happened though is nobody got a big head. Again, there's
Right.
exceptions. There's a few exceptions. Some guys were big enough or tough enough or strong enough or whatever. They were kind of left alone. But and then there's the guys who were like just excessively picked on that shouldn't have been to the degree they were. Again, putting
Right.
both those groups of exceptions aside, the 80% in the middle was a very well balanced, healthy, mentally healthy
Sure.
cohort,
Right.
because nobody was able to ever get too big ahead because you knew your time was coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you
Absolutely.
didn't get too big ahead, they were masterful at finding the ways to knock you off your pedestal. And it was, I think, immensely beneficial to shaping people who could overcome adversity and not take themselves too seriously and think of others and be kind and stuff like that, because
Right. Right.
what comes around goes around.
Absolutely. And that's the same way it was when I grew up. I mean, sometimes you were the brunt of the joke. Sometimes you were the one that was delivering it.
Yeah.
And as a result, nobody got too proud and nobody
Right.
got too high minded.
Nobody got too righteous. Nobody got too proud. Nobody got too arrogant. Again,
Exactly.
there's exceptions,
Sure.
but I think we talked about this a few months ago when we were talking about like the patriarchy.
Yeah.
And when I think about the patriarchy, that's what I think about is dudes not allowing other dudes to get too far out of whack.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yes, exactly.
and these graphs show how that has not been able to be maintained, because all of a sudden there was groups that emerged that were untouchable. And it's
Right.
like the high school version of the guy who couldn't, you couldn't pick on a guy in a wheelchair. Like that
Right.
was that was
Right.
that was
You would
off
never do
limits.
that.
You'd
Right.
never do that. Like
Yeah.
because the consequences to you would be astronomical, for one thing, but also
Right.
like you just learned as a young person growing up, like there's certain
That's not
things
right.
it's not right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But those charts put lots of groups of people in wheelchairs, so to speak, as
Right.
far as these folks can't be their flaws, their abuses, their unfairness that they participate in, they can't be touched because they're in a category that's untouchable.
Right.
And it very much established classes of people based on victim status or intersectionality or whatever, however you want to define that.
Yeah.
But that has obliterated that kind of commonality and everyone being on kind of equal footing, and all of us being able to overcome uh arrogance,
Yeah.
righteousness, wanting to impose our will upon people.
Right.
And if you look, like, a couple weeks ago, you were talking about like what's going on in Europe. Well, the groups of people who are doing a lot of the perpetrating in Europe are these groups of people who have now been deemed to be untouchable. You
Right.
can't point out their flaws. And what do you know? Within a few short years, that power is going unchecked, and that power is being
Yep.
used against other people in very harmful ways.
Yeah, and when we end up with all these sub communities like this, then you end up with no broader community. And
Right.
and I think one of the problems, if you listen if you pay attention at all to media, then a lot of people talk about my community. And my community is my interest group, whether it's one of
Yeah.
these interest groups, my racial group, my gender group, or whatever my oppressed group is, whatever
Yeah.
status
My
of
victim group.
oppression,
Yeah.
my victim group. And if we have all these disparate communities, but we do have there's only one giant community, and that giant community is oppressed people.
Yeah.
And so the majority are oppressed. So at some point the logic sort of breaks down. So the minority group is the majority group because it's got all these different sub communities of oppressed people. That's where intersectionality comes in, that every particular group of people that feels they're oppressed and they've got some kind of grievance. And that's I think that's one of the most unhealthy portions of all of this, is that if you identify yourself by a grievance, you are necessarily going to feel bad all the time, or feel bad a significant portion of the time, or only feel good when you're with other people who have the same grievance as you do.
Right.
Now,
And
that's terribly
there's no
unhealthy.
way to hold you accountable and say, yeah, that may be true. You may have this disadvantage, but also you have a personal responsibility to make things better anyway.
Right, right.
And
Well,
there's all of that is gone.
right. All of that's gone. And therefore your potential's wasted, because you're anything that you could accomplish. No, I can't do that because society's against me. That's a horrible place to live.
Yeah.
If you're, whatever happens to you, if you find somebody else to blame, and there's plenty of things that society does wrong, and there's plenty of ways that people are disadvantaged in society or not privileged in society. And those, you don't have to deny that that's the case, because it is the case, absolutely the case. The question is, what's your attitude towards it? How does it make you feel about yourself? And how does it make you react to what you're going to do about it? Are you going to take positive action to lift yourself out of this circumstance and to have a beneficial effect on society and beneficial effect on your life and your family and the people you encounter? Or are you just going to say, well, I'm oppressed, and so therefore I can't do anything about it, and I'm just going to be angry about it? And that kind of, this chart really points to the idea that if I'm angry enough, then I am useful to the elites. I'm useful to the powerful, and they're going to say
Yeah.
nice things about me, and they're going to give me benefits. And we're really subjugating ourselves in these individual interest groups to powerful elite people who really don't have our best interest at heart.
No, I think well, from my perspective, it does very much feel like the media is just trying to elevate their own status,
Yeah.
and they've lost their mission of servitude
Right.
and have adopted a mission of superiority.
Right.
And I mean, and so they just there's a I don't know if you saw it. I can pull it up if you want, but there's a clip of Stephen Colbert interviewing the gal from CNN. I can't remember her name. I can pull it up if you want. But anyhow,
Yeah.
she's a regular, like, weekday nightly commentator
Right.
on CNN. She's one of the regulars on the channel, and he's interviewing her on his late night show, and he says something like, well, everybody knows CNN, is just calling, reporting the news based on facts, and the
Yeah.
audience laughs. It wasn't supposed to be a joke. His audience laughed, and the gal goes, "Was that supposed to be a laugh line?" And he says, "Well, no, but I guess it is." And I think it's starting to dawn on them, like CNN's valuation, the company that owns CNN. I can't remember what company it is, but they just earlier this week or late last week on their balance sheet, the company that owns CNN basically put the value of CNN at zero and took like a $2.9 billion write off or something like that on their
Oh my
balance
word.
sheet, valuing CNN as worth $0.
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah.
holy smokes, you talk about a 40-year fall.
Oh yeah.
CNN in the late 80s, early 90s was like
It
the
was huge.
pinnacle of, it was massive.
Yeah.
It not only was a pioneer in that industry, but became the Leviathan, or the massive thing that, it just was an all powerful kind of thing. And for it to be,
24/7 news. And they
yeah,
created the 24/7
yeah.
news. It was
And
cable news network.
for them to be now literally worth $0 on the balance sheet of the company
Yeah.
that owns it, and for it to be a punchline when
Yeah.
a far leftist guy says to a far leftist host,
Right.
"Well, you guys, of course, are reporting the news as fact," and the audience, their own audience, not a conservative audience, their audience laughs. You're like, holy smokes! Like, somebody somewhere has got to be going, maybe we missed the mark here, but I think they're too far gone. I think
Well,
they're too
yeah.
far.
I think it's what we were talking about, I think, last week. You get to a point where you're so much in your own bubble and so much in
Yeah,
your own, your own ego and belief system about that you're right and everybody that doesn't think like you is wrong, that you can't accept that. But it would be interesting, those graphs that we just showed a few minutes ago, to overlay on those graphs the trust in media over that same period of time.
yeah,
Because, as we've discussed this before, the Walter Cronkite, the David Brinkley and Chet Huntleys of the world, and all that, there was high trust in those days that what they said, they were actually reporting to stuff to us without their own, overlay of bias. Now, they were biased,
yeah.
but they didn't make it obvious. You can't
Or yeah,
avoid
or
it.
at least we, at a minimum, we didn't have anything to compare it to, so we didn't know any better.
Right. Well, sure. Yeah, you bet. I mean, there's the whole evolution of all that, and the emergence of talk radio and all that in the 90s, et cetera. But it would be interesting to see the organic relationship between those two graphs,
Yeah,
and not just those, but at this point, the media and the sort of the dominant cultural imperatives, progressive imperatives, et cetera, there's no difference. There's no
yeah.
white space between them. And
No.
so,
I saw a chart last week that showed that the media's favorability rating is actually below that of Congress, which is
that's staggering.
that's
Yeah,
that was pretty like, wow, that's I didn't know you could do that. Like that's quite a benchmark they've hit there.
yeah. I know. I've seen a number of comedians that have compared various favorability ratings. The favorability rating of getting into an accident in your car versus the favorability rating of Congress, or the favorability
Yeah,
rating of dog poop on your front yard
yeah.
is higher than that
But
of Congress.
we talked last week also about like how our culture is very immediate gratification right now, and you're in the
Yeah,
marketing space, so you
yeah,
understand like everything is like eyeballs and clicks,
yep,
and the most outlandish, the most scary thing, that's what gets the
right,
clicks. And you see how they kind of they just kind of bastardize that like we're just immune to that kind of stuff now. Like we just
yeah,
know it's all negativity to get our attention and things like that. And further, I think there is a bit of an awakening,
yes,
not large scale, but I think there's the beginnings of an awakening of folks going, wait a second, it can't all be like you guys are saying.
right,
It can't be all. Not every white guy I run into can be a racist. Like that can't be the way it is.
right,
Not every guy wishes his wife was barefoot and pregnant. First of all, I don't know any
right,
guys like who would want that for a
right,
variety of
right.
reasons. But um, I think people are starting to kind of come like awaken out of that kind of
Yeah,
stupor we were in. Like if you think back when COVID was in the full throes, like every channel had the death count in the top right hand corner, and like now 1.1 million people have died. Like it's just icky and gross, and just like,
yeah.
come on.
I think it might even be more significant than you're thinking there than you just said. I think it might, because I mean, look at the rise of Substack, look at the rise of Rumble, look at the rise of of all these non-traditional channels, and like as you said, look at the viewer stats for MSNBC. Look at the the valuation of CNN being zero. I haven't heard that before. No, I've thought that CNN is probably worth zero for many years, but
I've called them worthless before myself, for sure.
that's just me, So, but you look at those things, and you look at what the distrust in media, and I think that, and this always happens with elites. Elites always think more of themselves than is warranted by the circumstance, and they think people are more with them than they really are. They always that there comes a point where everybody goes along to get along for some period of time. I mean, just the Declaration of Independence says, it's to go back there, that people will suffer ills as long as ills are sufferable. They'll suffer wrong as long as wrong. And I think that's true with media too. They'll suffer garbage media and think, okay, well, maybe someplace in this I can pick out what's really going on. But there comes a time when it's like, well, just stop. Just stop saying this
Yeah.
stupid stuff. I mean, and lest anybody think that I'm saying, and I might have mentioned this in the past, it is all about clickbait. And, Fox is doing much better than any other cable channel, to be sure. But even Fox, it's like you can't pull out the actual, story from the headline anymore. You have to click in. So it's all about clickbait. It's all about eyeballs. It's all about click through rate and conversions and all that kind of stuff, which is my business. I understand that.
Yeah.
So but I think they're as those empires end up collapsing, then you're going to have, I mean, they're going to have to be a reckoning. They're going to have to rethink how they're doing things.
Yeah. I posted this on Facebook a couple days ago. This is CBS News.
Oh
And
yes, I
so,
remember this.
for people who don't know, Donald Trump came out, I don't know, June 9th or something like that, a
Yeah,
couple months ago, and said something about how he would, when he becomes president, if he becomes president, he's not going to tax tips anymore,
right.
right? So presumably targeting the Las Vegas area, which Nevada is a swing state, and there's like hospitality is like the number one industry in that state, and like tips are a big deal and whatever. presumably going after folks like that to sway their vote, right? So he says he's going to put no tax on tips. Now, Kamala Harris said the same thing. I don't know, 4 or 5 days ago, as you and I
Not
are
very long
recording
ago,
this. Yeah, less than a week ago, as you and I are recording this. Here's how CBS News on their website describes these two actions, which are essentially the same. They're both they neither one, to my understanding, has rolled out like definitive like IRS codes and rules. Like they just said we're not going to tax tips anymore. That's all they said. Okay.
Right.
Here's how CBS News articulate or explains to the public what's happening when Kamala Harris says that.
Right.
Vice President Kamala Harris is rolling out a new policy position saying she'll fight to end taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers. Oh, okay. That sounds pretty good. Now, same CBS News, same website, same app, all that stuff. Now talking about Donald Trump doing it. Former President Donald Trump's vow to stop taxing tips would cost the federal government up to $250 billion over 10 years, according to a nonpartisan watchdog group.
And a month before, just a month before.
A month of, maybe two. Yeah, but not very long before. Yeah. So the idea that this might be propaganda, I think people are starting to go, okay, even if you agree with Kamala Harris, even if you want her as president, I think that most of us, even if we get the person in power we would like, and person who's like supposed to be our representative in the government that we would want, I think we all still want a fair media and a media who will do what we traditionally thought, which is do the work that we don't have time to do, to let us know what's going on, hold powerful people accountable, to not abuse people, not to extort people, not to obfuscate with our money, like be good custodians of the tax dollars that they're collecting, like basic stuff like that. I think that most Americans still want that. There's also going to be a cohort that's like, no, as long as they kill Donald Trump or kill him figuratively, kill his kill his political career, kill his character, kill his movement, then whatever it takes. I certainly there's people like that, but I think by and large, like most Americans still are like, we got to have a media that's on the up and up.
I think that's true. And I think, and here's where that graph becomes useful to the media, not going along with the regular American. And that is that there's been plenty of people who have been interviewed who are so angry that they're like, I don't care if the media lies as long as it does as long as it gets the outcome I want. So I think what you're saying is true for the average person who is not in a perpetual state of rage. If, however, you're in a perpetual state of rage, and this could apply to the right or the left, I believe it applies more to the left, but if you're in a perpetual state of rage, then anything, whether it's true, whether it's false, whether it's good, whether it violates your morals, whatever, it doesn't even matter. You can maintain that kind of disconnection from right and wrong if you're in a perpetual state of rage. So therefore, it's in the media and in the elites, best interest to keep people as enraged as possible, which is why that hundreds of percentages of increases over a 10-year period of time in outrageous things. Because nobody all of those things, nobody wants to see somebody oppressed because of who they are, because of their skin color, their religion, or whatever. Nobody, that's distasteful to us as Americans. It's a good impulse that we don't like that. And so,
I think that it's to your point, it's repulsive for people, even who agree politically or ideologically with those folks who say, I don't care what it takes as long as they crush the other side.
Right.
I think that even people who agree with that person ideologically will hear things like that in some cases, not all, and say, that's too much. That's too far.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
I don't think most Americans at the core are like that. And so the aim of media, I believe, and I don't have a study to prove this, but the aim of media, I believe, is to keep a small percentage of the most, vocal people activated all the time. Because, if you're just walking down the street and people are yelling at the top of your lungs, you're not going to want to say, calm down, buddy. You're just going to avoid them. You're just going to go, let them alone and, let them lead the parade. I don't really even care. And so it's a small minority of folks of the activist class that then end up controlling everything.
Yeah. All right, Dave. So we pretty extensively week to week cover, our mission here on this podcast is explain to future generation what this moment is like.
Right.
Probably not that different than other crisis eras in other societies. Overwhelmingly, it's not awesome, right? In
Right.
a in a in a global and like nationwide sense. Now,
Right.
I still have a very happy marriage. I'm
Yeah.
sure you do
Yeah.
too. I
Yeah.
still have relationships that mean a lot to me and
Yeah.
and that are thriving and all that kind of stuff. Um, but how does one navigate this? How does
Yeah.
one go through this period of crisis? And even, some people, I'm told occasionally, not frequently, but occasionally that, man, you and Dave you're sure are negative about stuff, whatever.
Sure.
And I say regularly, like, I'm trying not to be too cynical, I'm trying not
Yeah.
to be too negative, but I also don't want to be like, you know, head in the sand either.
Yeah. Right.
I personally, I try to have a balance of like, yeah, this we need to be aware of what's going on because it'd be foolish not to, but
Right.
also like we still live in the greatest country in the world, and we still live in
Absolutely.
a fantastic, relative to other eras, like the 1400s in Europe was not a great time to be
No,
alive,
not so good. No.
and 1953 in China was probably not a great time to be alive, and
No.
like, okay, relative to other points in history and other geographic locations, we have it pretty easy,
Yeah.
and things are fairly dark relative to our experience and what we would like to see, and only getting worse as they go. So
Right.
what are we supposed to do with all that? Like, how are we supposed to like live? Like, again, I
Yeah.
picture the lady when I first started doing this. Like I told you, my reason for doing this is I don't want to be the person who lived 2 miles from Auschwitz and didn't say anything.
Yeah.
On the other hand, as you and I have talked about, that woman probably had grandkids she wanted to bake cookies for, and like a
Sure.
husband she wanted to love, and a life she wanted to live the best she could. And there's only so much energy, and like, so what the hell are we supposed to do, Dave?
Yeah. No, I think and you've touched on a lot of the things that I think are the motivating factors. It's like, because we do confine ourselves for the most part to this, what Howe calls in his book, the saculum, an age that we happen to be in, this 80-year age. And we happen to be, just because we are at the end of that time where this crisis is. So, but I think if you take it into three categories, you take it into faith, you take it into history, and you take it into you sort of your existential life, what you're talking about living, yeah, I've got it really good. I love what I do. I play with technology all day long. You and I are talking long distance. You're in Arizona and I'm in Washington. I mean, so I'm just going to take that one real quick and deal with that real fast. I like the car I drive. I need some work. I eat what I want, sometimes too much of it.
You still have a Bentley, right? That's what your daily
No, I
driver is.
traded in for the McLaren.
Okay, yeah,
I
that
got a
makes
new
sense.
client, had my client buy me a McLaren.
Midlife crisis car. I got you. Yeah, that makes sense.
So, so I got it pretty good. So yeah, there's plenty of stuff to be unhappy about, but I got it pretty good. But let's look at two other things on a more broad scale. And this is, when you first approached me about doing a podcast, you're like, I want to talk to the future because I want to tell them what it's like going through this now. Because in a lot of ways, I think one of the reasons we do this is we want to give people hope. Yeah, we talk about some negative stuff because it's all around us. It's hard not to talk about. But if you look at the broad scope of history, first of all, if you look across the past three crises, the past two crisis years in America, we've only been around for a little over 245 some odd years. We came out of those pretty good. We survived the crisis. And there's no guarantee that we're going to survive it now, but we get a pretty good track record of surviving the crisis. So, and if the other thing that's interesting about the history point of that, I wish I had this graph, but there was a graph I saw several years ago about the general life on Earth over the past 5,000 some odd years, and the growth of the human race, punctuated by crisis eras. Yes, we're punctuated by this war and that war and these evil atrocities and slavery and all these different things. But in general, if you look at life on Earth, even the past 2,000 years, the general standard of living has improved dramatically. Look, one of my, I don't have much use for the United Nations most of the time, but there's there's been over the past like 30 years or so, these programs in child poverty across the world and to improve child health, things of those natures over the past 100 years, child poverty, infant mortality, these things have plummeted. They've just gone down, down, down. So even though there's these negative things that happen in these punctuated periods, after those punctuated periods and throughout those punctuated periods, it's been a general upward and to the right improvement in the human condition. We live longer than we ever have before. That isn't global, but it's more global now than it's ever been before. There's less poverty now. Is it global? No, there's people still cooking in their homes, and one of the major causes of death in India and a number of other developing nations is lung cancer because they cook on dung stoves in the middle of their homes. Well, that because of technology is slowly going away. Now, it's still a problem. It's not solved, but and you can take numerous metrics. This technology that we use now, our ability to communicate globally, there's just so many different things that improved so dramatically across these crisis eras. So I have every expectation. In fact, there's plenty of studies. Even the UN does all these climate studies, and I'm a geek. I read these climate studies, and they talk about what's likely to be the standard of living in the year 2100 in Kenny G's time, when Kenny G is as old as we are right now.
Well,
And
as old as you are right now.
well,
Not
I
as
know
old as
you're probably
yeah.
still, yeah, I know you're still a young man, and I'm glad you could convince yourself of that. That's very gratifying. So, but there's the average standard of living economically that's projected even by the United Nations in the year 2100 is going to be, and I don't remember the numbers exactly, but it's going to be substantially better than we are right now. And so, like things like whatever's happening with the climate, and we don't need to get into that now, but whatever's happening with the climate, we will be so much better positioned because of our economic prowess and our technological prowess to deal with whatever happens then than we are right now. So there's all of that. And I'm just a history geek, and I love all this stuff. History says that things are getting better. Now, if you look at it when you're in the midst of a crisis here, if you looked at it when you're in Germany in World War II, if you looked at it when you're in China when the Maoists took over, and you're thinking that it's the end of history, it's the end of the world as we know it. I mentioned to you, I did a speech a while back. It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. I can't remember who sang that song, but it was an interesting song, and I was given the
Beatles, wasn't it?
No. It's much more modern than that.
Oh,
I don't, and Foo
I'm thinking
Fighters.
of a different song then.
Yeah, maybe it's the Foo Fighters or something. I don't remember what it was,
Okay.
but anyway, the interesting thing about it is that we tend to think, and this is again why this theory of history that Howland Strauss and others have popularized is that it's cyclical. It's not all the way down. It's not all the way up. In the Christian faith that we live in, there's a lot of folks that think of it as all the way down into the end, and then Jesus comes, and and that's fine. And I'm not going to argue theology. But history tends to be cyclical. And the other portion of that I think of, I mentioned, is faith. And that is, if you look at this odd way that history unfolds, that is somewhat predictable, you might even say there's a plan. I happen to believe that there's a plan. And ultimately that plan is a good news plan for the betterment of humanity to better fulfill what was lost in the Garden of Eden. I mean, the whole, whether you take it literally or whether you take it figuratively, it was, and not to get too theological, but it was a plan for a vibrant, good earth with people getting along with each other. And just, it was a positive thing that was lost. And the whole plan of history seems to be to restore that to the way it's supposed to be. And so, yes, there's these punctuated things, but right after Jesus died, the last thing he said before he left the earth was, go teach the good news. Go tell people good news. So, at that point, they were scattered. There wasn't a Christian church. There was some people, and their savior had just died. So it's like, okay, you're telling me all this bad stuff has just happened.
Which good news do you mean, sir?
Yeah, exactly. Which good news? I mean, it's going to be eaten by the lions in Rome when Nero comes, when Jerusalem's destroyed.
Yeah.
How am I supposed to? But that's
I'm not sure you know what good news is.
Exactly. And if in those days, if they could, and they didn't live long lives in those days, if that's their mindset, and we're going through these kinds of things now, I think you have to have faith that whether you have it just because you observe how history is unfolded, or whether you have it because you do have faith that this is supposed to improve, and it will improve. And yes, there'll be other punctuated times when things get really bad, and eventually Jesus comes back, and there we go. So I think that's how you go through that. I mean, that's how I approach it. I mean, yes, I'm concerned about all these things that we talk about every week. I'm concerned about, what's going to happen with my grandson and with, future generations. But I have faith that it's going to improve, both from my knowledge of history and from my understanding of faith. So that's how I answer that question, Brian. What else you got?
Well, geez, I don't think there's
Can I
anything I
get
can
an
say to top
amen?
that. Yeah, no kidding. We definitely need amen after that. I think the only thing I would add is, I don't listen to like a lot of motivational stuff. I listen to
Yeah.
some. I take in a YouTube video from Les Brown or Tony Robbins
Sure.
once in a while or
Oh, yeah.
something. So there's days where I enjoy that or frankly need it more than others.
Yeah.
And there's a couple things they talk about. One as a recurring theme of like how to get through hard times, not just in a global macro sense like we're talking, but
Right.
you know, what do you do if if you've been in prison and you're just getting out and like you're having to start your life over? Like what do you do
Yeah.
after a death of a loved one? Like what do you do if your marriage falls apart or you lost your job and you're destitute, relative to how you had lived before? And one of the things they talk about is gratitude. And you
Yeah.
just kind of touched on that, like, in a macro sense, like, listen, we live in arguably the best era ever in
Yeah.
humanity, in
Yeah.
arguably the best country ever in
Yep.
humanity,
Yep.
having the benefits of the most modern technology that's been developed that we're aware of, at least. That's not insignificant.
Right.
I would rather be living. I don't think I'm man enough to live in the 1740s.
No,
I,
thanks.
I don't think. I mean, I guess if I grew up knowing only that, I might. But I like the comforts of toilet paper and the internet and
Yes,
stuff like
exactly.
that. I
Right.
so I think that's a critical component. And then I heard I may have mentioned this to you a couple weeks ago on the podcast, but I heard Jordan Peterson talking about having goals and making efforts towards achieving those goals affects the brain the same way methamphetamines and cocaine and those kinds of drugs do. That
Yeah.
if you have goals you're working towards, and you can connect the dots from I'm doing this activity to reach this outcome, and I can look back and see here's the progress I've made. That hits the same part of the brain as dopamine or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I don't know the science behind it that well. Um, but I think as we look around and like, okay, the comfortability of the world that we knew seems to be being disturbed.
Hmm.
Well, what do I do with that? Well, all I can do is what I can do. All I can
Right.
control is what I can control. I can't control who's going to be in presidency. I can't
Yep.
control if we go to war with Iran. Like I can't do anything about that. Um, you and I are doing the things I think I need to do in a
Yeah.
selfish sense to kind of get this stuff off my chest, and also
Right.
hopefully um, have some produce some kind of benefit out of this ickiness we're going through. Is that
Right.
hopefully someday somebody can listen to this stuff, kind of like an Anne Frank's diary kind of way, and like, what did these people think as they were going through? I think if
Yeah.
nothing else, it'll be a good thing for society to kind of hear from guys who think like you and I do. Again, whether we become extinct because Christians are all, or people who
Right.
have Judeo-Christian values are all rounded up and fed to the lions, or
Right.
whatever that looks like, or it doesn't go that way, and we kind of reestablish our country based on Judeo-Christian values. People are still going
Right.
to ask, like, why'd you let this happen? Why'd you let this
Right.
go so far? And I think that you and I are doing a bit of a, maybe I'm being too arrogant when I say this, but I think we're doing a bit of a service of explaining to future
Sure.
generations like how this is unfolding. I would love to know what the lady thought who lived 2 miles from Auschwitz. I would love
Yeah.
to hear what she thought was really happening.
Yeah.
But honestly, for me, it just boils down to gratitude.
Yeah.
Uh, I have a life that many people wish they could have, and as
Yeah.
do you
Yeah.
across the globe. Um, and I have things I'm working towards in life and goals I have that have nothing to do with whether or not Iran and Israel go to war, or who wins in Russia and Ukraine, and whether
Right.
you know Gary Johnson is the Speaker of the House or Hakeem Jeffries. Like, I can't control. Now, don't get me wrong. It annoys the shit out of me when they take our money and abuse it and give our money to, by the hundreds of billions to countries who literally chant death to America. That I think we have an obligation to not just be sheep and go along with that. But I also have
Right.
to recognize the limitations of I'm just a man, just doing the best I can, and I have a limited number of hours in a day to focus on things that can make me feel productive, and that's all I can do.
Absolutely. Well, and I think one of the things, there's a favorite quote of mine about, we can you and I could both get caught up in the political, stuff of the day. And there's a
Yeah,
favorite quote of mine by Samuel Johnson, who wrote in the 1800s. He was this like the beginning of political journalism. He said, it's a little poem he wrote. He said, how small of all that human hearts endure that part which laws or kings can cause or cure, still to ourself in every place consigned to be, our own felicity we make or find. So in other words, whoever gets elected president, I'm not going to put too much stake in how my felicity, my happiness, my life happiness is going to be tied up in that. And I have to, and I keep that one around. It's a little one to remind myself that regardless of all the things that are happening in the world and what the powerful people are doing, for the most part throughout history, in Rome, in Germany, in, like you said, the grandma that lived just a little bit down from Auschwitz made her grandkids cookies and had a nice time, before whatever happened.
yeah,
The Sound of Music, they had a good time in that until they got kicked out and Germany took. So, I think you have to maintain perspective. I think the gratitude perspective is incredibly important, because if you don't have gratitude, you're going to get caught up in the anger and the angst of the age. And
yeah.
then I think putting these things in proper context is really critical.
Yeah, and I think that part of it is, you and I spend a lot of time talking about how the values and principles of our country have shifted away from what I would consider a more reasonable
Yeah,
and appropriate balance between society's obligation to take care of people and people's responsibility to take care of themselves.
right,
It would be disingenuous and hypocritical for me to say that applies to them and not to me.
right.
During this time where society is not meeting my expectations, I still have a personal responsibility to make the most of it.
Yep, exactly. Absolutely.
And some days I do better than others. Some weeks I completely fail, and some weeks I'm
Yeah,
like I just get sucked into the news. I just get like I don't know if distraught's not the right word, but overcome with frustration and
yeah,
anger and resentment and things like that.
yeah.
And then other weeks, like I'm going to Maui next week for 10 days. Like it's be pretty hard for me to be upset while
Not
I'm over
too bad.
there.
Not too bad on the Maui beaches. No, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So, all right, Dave. Well, I hope this is helpful for Kenny G. And for those of you listening in the modern times, this would be a great time for you guys to chime in and let us know what did Dave and I miss as far as like how do we positively navigate this, relatively unpleasant relative to 2007 or 2009, relatively unpleasant environment that we're in. um, I'd love to hear what you guys do.
Yeah,
How are you doing? And maybe maybe you just turn off the news. Lots of folks just turn off the news, and that
exactly.
does it. But anyhow, as always, we'd love to hear where you think we got it right, where you think we got it wrong. You can do that by going to unsilentpodcast.com or check out the Rumble comment section. There's an easy comment section there to chime in and give your 2 cents there. And with that, that's until next time. This is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.